Now that we are live, I wanted to ask 5 seconds before if we posted the StreamYard link, right? So if anyone wants to come and be part of the roundtable, especially if they want to be in the hot seat, and we'll focus on your project, feel free to hit the StreamYard. This is our roundtable where we discuss what our projects are, as well as any help that we might need from them. Who would like to go first?
I could start. So my project is GullyBot, a robot or a bot that helps build mass agreement through evidence and logic and helping people understand each other better. I have not been doing much of anything on it. I'm mostly moving into a new home and taking on a new part-time job. So I haven't done much. The type of things I'm looking for as far as help are people, like if there are two people that are willing to have a debate or a discuss, trying to come to agreement on a contentious issue, that they'd be willing to go through the GullyBot process. That would be helpful to me. And then also if anyone has any things where they're trying to convince the world that the world should believe X or something, then that might be something where we could go through. Although it's helpful also if they have someone that kind of doesn't think that that's important, then we could use the process on that as well. So those are some ideas, and then anyone who wants to kind of play around with it.
All right, I can go next. Then my brain will be like, yep, we went from left to right. So anyway, my projects are Solution Raising, which is an hour-long conversation where we generate adjacent possible solutions that we can implement now if we had 10,000 people and $100,000. And we held one this last week. I didn't even pick the topic till the morning of. Eric actually picked the topic. We did food security, more global food security, but what's about to come down the pipeline, I think, is going to be rather devastating in the world. Did we solve it? No, we did not. We did not really even come up. We got a little too into how do we get to 10,000 people, which is what my other project is, which is the Meta Learning Magic. We held our very first of the 6-week course. We held week 1 this last week. We concentrated on health, and I thought it actually went very well. I was expecting to be a little more of a shit show, a little more of like, okay, we have to find the power here and massage it and make it work. And I actually found that we just kind of like when we did it, that there was a lot of power that happened in the conversation, and we were able to, people either came with meta problems like myself, or ones that I do think ended up getting a little bit of an improvement on. And we'll see next week if people took natural action on their goals, right? Whether it was something that is going to be more. And I'm really excited. It's hard for me to wait this 6 weeks. Like I just want the next thing coming. And so I honestly don't need help from anyone. I just need patience with myself and to start concentrating on like work-life balance of like getting my life in order and truly just allow the process, allow the 6-week course while I'm creating the 6th week during the 6 weeks. So that is my update.
Cool. My project is Conferati. It is meant to be an information source that earns your trust. And then sort of the sister project, WikiElection, which is that same information source information source that earns your trust, but centered around politics. I have been working with someone on the prototype for WikiElection, and then recently have sort of done a bit of a pivot to focus on Conferati instead. And I've been working with that same developer in Bentley just to sort of figure out if going out a platform is the right route, what technologies to use, that sort of thing. So still working on the specs for Conferati itself, and we'll continue doing that and hopefully get that project started soon.
I actually did think of something I'm trying to work through in my head, which is whether or not Solution Raisings should start its own YouTube channel, either take over Idea Cafe's channel, which has just under 100 subscribers, or start its own, partly because I want to I know I can't do it on my own, but I want to do a reach out to like existing people on the platform who have a lot of subscribers and have them host a solution raise. I actually am hosting a solution raising this Thursday with a lot of the anti-MLM people. I put it out to the anti-MLM community, not looking for people with influencers, and it ended up being the creators that are more comfortable being on camera to come and participate in that. And it got me thinking that that could be a way to grow solution raising. But I also don't want to do it on my own. Like I really want like someone else who wants to take on a YouTube channel, right? Take on like the algorithm and creating, and I'll just do the recording and show up. And I guess I don't know if that's taking on too much for me, whether it's a good idea at all, whether I just keep it there. And I'm looking for like maybe a 5-minute conversation on it, not to take up the whole hour for sure. It's like work through the pros and cons of.
I think Idea Cafe and solution raisings are close enough that none of the viewers would like unsubscribe because it was so different. So I think that's good. Yeah, and if you do have a YouTube channel, you can always give someone else access to post and stuff. So yeah, I can't think of a real downside of doing that.
I guess one of the questions would be if I continue doing my Wednesday morning solution raising, which is basically just Game B people. And then I'm also reaching out to influencers to be like, hey, I noticed you cared about this topic. Want to do one on cancer? Who else do you want to invite? That is, which is kind of the idea of what Idea Cafe was to begin with, was to reach out to influencers and have them come and bring kind of part of their audience with them. Do I keep Game B on not Together Tech, on Jubilee Create Something Amazing's channel, the Game B one, and then just have the influencer solution raisings on the other one, so that the influencers themselves can point to a hopefully slightly more professional channel, right? That isn't all of my random thoughts constantly. But do I keep my other Game B on there? Game B solution raisings on that one or not? What is that?
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad idea to mix the Game B ones and the other ones, just because anyone who's interested in solution raising probably wouldn't be too offended by Game B. So it might be good to combine all those and then have your random thoughts on your Jubilee channel.
Yeah. And whatever my new fire is.
Right.
Fires start on that channel, and then they kind of go other places.
And that's a great way to do it. It's always good to have kind of a general place, like a individual blog or something, so you can try things out, not have to build a whole brand to try an idea. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so maybe it is time to graduate solution raising onto its own.
And it makes sense to take over Idea Cafe, right? Part of my worry is like, do I want 12 channels? No. Idea Cafe is enough of the similar, and it's not continuing on, and it can kind of show my progression of what a conversation can do as well.
Yeah, and I think Idea Cafe, because it's kind of like the birthplace for, if you don't have a solution. Well, wait, I'm sorry. Yeah, they're similar enough. I think it'd be okay.
All right, awesome. That was my thing. Thanks for helping me look through it. And does anyone else have anything they would like to discuss? We have that other idea for the hot seat, although Radek isn't here, and neither is Vincent, that I had suggested last week, of like kind of problem solving how we get data entry people for you guys, right? That are looking to put in like an hour a week, or, you know what I mean? Like micro amounts, but volunteer, or you guys all share someone's, time, paying the minimum wage in another country. I mean, we can brainstorm solutions if that's something you guys are looking to solve right now. I mean, that's not really for my project, so.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the, I haven't put much thought into it. so yeah, I'm not sure if I'm ready to use that right now. Mm-hmm. I did hire someone to do some data entry, and it worked okay. But I'd be looking at new sources. So yeah, I think eventually Adriel, is data entry something you're looking for yet, Adriel?
Not yet. I mean, it's definitely going to be needed at some point, but until there's like sort of, a more functional prototype that's waiting for data entry, then
Yeah.
I won't need that. And then for the most point, the goal is to use the prototype to gain an audience, and then to check the audience to be like, hey, who wants to help? Actually, populate this thing.
Yeah, for mine, it would be better to have a building these argument trees are they're designed to be easily understood, but to do them well, it's kind of like creating a video or music. It takes a lot of work, and it looks simple when it's done, but to do it well, it really takes some thought. Although it could be seen as a puzzle, so it would be interesting to, give people the, as volunteering, they might also find it pleasurable to try and solve a problem like that. So yeah. Can't think any more to chat about that. It's a good idea though, Julie.
All right. So who wants to be in the hot seat then? Or an idea in the hot seat?
Hey Joel, are you getting any I know Radek's not here, so it's probably not fair to do that. But have you seen any more prototypes or any more thing being deployed in the last several weeks?
No, still haven't seen any movement on Wiki Election itself, like on the earlier prototype. I think that Radek was starting a new job soon, so I think if it's not done soon, it's probably not getting done. Yeah, that part I wasn't sure if it was going to happen. It sounded sort of up in the air. And that's, I guess, a part of the reason for the pivot to Conferati to sort of also help power Wiki Election. And with this part of the project intentionally being sort of multiple developers and having closer to, I guess, a proper development environment where I can go, and hire one or two people on Upwork, and then hopefully also have you or Radek assist with the.
So right now you're spending time writing up some specifications.
Yeah, and I've thought a bit on the sort of, is it worth it to go the platform route? And I do think, there's going to end up being like 5 to 10 portals in the not too distant future. And that's going to sort of be a common way to spin off information, because Conferati is going to sort of be the main one, but that's going to get unwieldy fast for various topics. Yeah, so I guess if there's nothing else, we could talk about that, but I do always feel a bit weird with getting super technical on a channel that's not necessarily meant for that.
I'm down with that. I can also turn off my camera and zone out while you guys go techie. And if I have anything to add, I can go back in like we did a couple weeks ago. One of the other topics, if you don't want to discuss that today, we could talk about, I know with Brent Weinstein getting basically kicked off of Facebook and Jim Rutt coming back from his sabbatical to kind of say, we need to get off of Facebook and onto anything else. We could talk about that. Why now and not like... This was always a problem. We always knew Facebook needed to be have an alternative, but the issue is there's dozens of alternatives and there's a reason we're on Facebook. Like, it feels weird to now be like, well, now that Brett's not here, we'll go over here, instead of like, wait, is this the place where the people are? Was he instrumental? Was he creating Game B? He was creating Unity 2020. Like, what? Like, it feels premature to switch platforms and yet needed. Like, it was kind of needed a year ago and a year from now, but I don't know about right now with this cat. Anyway, that's a possibility.
Right. Like, is this the thing that changes the direction of the whole thing? I don't think so. I think,
No, and there's already the Discord server and everything else there. Yeah. For, like, how would people find Game B MeWe, right? Like, they're not on MeWe or whatever that was called. MeWe. That we're not on there, and that's part of having the Facebook group. Do we mean shutting down the Facebook group completely, or with all of its brand? Like, what happens? Oh, that was one of the things. That was more for yesterday. Someone suggested we change the branding of our Facebook page to like Game B project / Together Tech, because people get very confused as to what Together Tech is, even though it's in the URL. Anyway, yeah, I can put that on the agenda for Friday.
Yeah, I was looking. So I guess Facebook, I didn't even hear about that until just now, but it looks like they suspended his account and then put it back up, but it was mostly a automated system.
Yeah, and then there was questions around, like, it said something about it's been reviewed and banned, and so it's like, well, wait, was it automatically reviewed?
We're also having reports of like things that would get them banned now. That like it's like 8 years ago you said this thing,
Right?
That was false information. It was like, yeah, you guys weren't on to false information then. Like, you're really gonna go back and ban someone over what they posted 8 years ago? Like, it's Facebook is scrambling, people are scrambling. Like, it's a very chaotic time, and this is part of why influencer culture, like having one person with 1 million followers on many Brett has, that then when it goes down, you lose those followers. Like, how else are people supposed to find him, right? He's on YouTube, he's got his personal channel, but people don't necessarily know to pick. Like, we need to build our whatever we're building in a way that's resilient, right? When it's like, we know the platforms are going to kick us off, what happens when they do, right? Like, where's the fire meeting place, right? Like, when you leave the house and go to when internet goes down, where do we meet? Where do we actually I mean, that's part of what meta learning magic is. The magic in it is that it's growing outwards in a way that hopefully we don't need to be dependent on a platform, because although we're on Facebook and Facebook Messenger, if it goes away, I know the 6 people in my group, right? And as we grow up from there, we have people's email addresses. It's somewhat easier to be like, Facebook kicked us off. We're on Discord now. This kicked us off. We're here now. Like, Facebook being the only come through us, direct message people through us, don't collect people's emails, because it's just not as a normal thing, right? You don't ask people for emails. They come into your group. And that they have the power to just kick people off and not give them any warning is going to come back to bite Facebook in the ass. Like, you like being both of those things is the hurts your membership, not members, customers, the products. It hurts your products, because that's what we are, Facebook. It also doesn't look like this is naturally starting a conversation, so I'm totally down with the more technical side of Confrati. I just want to chat that.
Yeah, I also wanted to mention that I may not, with everything going on, I might have to cut this my Game B involvement down to 1 meeting a week. I mean, like, so I might not be as, I mean, if I can make it on Saturdays. I was thinking Friday would probably be better for me, because we're starting to want to do things on Saturday mornings.
Yeah,
I might not be as consistent as I have been in the past on this one.
And this, how are people finding? I mean, how are you both finding the Saturday morning? Because I like us being able to have this time to just focus on our projects and have that. Mm-hmm. But if we're not, like, for the last few weeks, it's been a lot. Like, you guys haven't necessarily moved forward on your projects, moving forward on other things. This might not be the most useful time for you guys, right? And if other people aren't coming, sorry, I've got to go deal with my smoke alarm.
Yeah, I think that we're just probably just hitting a lull where we're not making much movement. So maybe it's not as valuable. We could switch to every other week or something. Or just even wait until someone says, could keep the time slot open. And if someone says, oh, I need some help on something, then we could do it. So that may be an option as well. Like,
when it, like, kind of treat it somewhat like a project raising, we still do what we do, where we introduce our projects and ourselves, then we switch over to the hot seat. So we kind of only do them when we have someone for the hot seat.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense, or one of us has a pressing issue with our project, which I don't know. That's never going to happen. Like, even my thing I brought up, right? Like, I wouldn't have called a meeting for it. I wouldn't have been like, hey, I need to figure out how to create my own YouTube video channel. Yeah, that seems to be a good a good option. I also feel like with Together Tech, since we're doing the foundational documents, it's bringing up a lot of the conversations we're needing to have. And it does seem to, I don't know what's happening when we're done that though, right? Like we are figuring out how to make decisions. We're not actually making the decision. If that makes, like, we need that in place first and how that looks. So I'm definitely down. How about, if this sounds good to both of you, how about we cut the Saturday 9 a.m., whatever time that is, session until the new year. And then in the new year, kind of reintroduce it with a, this time slot. We can even have people sign up, right? And say, however long in advance, say this person, right? That if you have a project, come and be in the hot seat. We will know when they are. You can see who's going to be there, and we'll at least know. Because yeah, I'd prefer to come to these anyway with somebody in the hot seat so we can focus on a new.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
And then we might have them weekly, right? Because then if there's a sign up, people might like, ooh, there's a sign up for 4 weeks, so I better be the 5th week, so I better be the 6th week, so I better be, and also that invitation of like, yes, and you can hold your own. Like these 6 people who just signed up could hold their own at any time on a Saturday and offer solutions to each other.
I think that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, I like it.
Right, so after today, we won't meet next week. We'll put something out explaining that, saying that we're not gonna. We're gonna put something out. Who would like to put that out? Because me typing out thoughts is never quite great. I can butcher it. I mean, I'm down with letting it be whatever comes out of my head.
And I guess we need to update several places.
Yeah, I'm not great at that either.
Right.
Leave the crumbs behind. Follow the crumbs to get to where we are. But yeah, I don't know where to update it. Like,
I could probably take that on, unless you really want to, Joe.
Not really. Could that end up being like a sticky post on the Facebook group? Sort of, so for the next 2-ish months, when people load up, that's one of the top ones. And it's something like, right, we had these sessions, we're going to be doing them again in the new year, but we didn't have people sign up. So if you want to sign up, you use this post.
I can't quite think of how to word all that. So if you want to create that post, and then I can kind of go in and take it off of the other places that might be confusing people if they find it written differently. So
maybe just a spreadsheet with like the date of the first Saturday in January, the first maybe 4 or 5, and just, hey, if anyone wants to sign up. Do we want them to sign up 3 months in advance, though? Their project might not exist anymore, to say, hey, we will have a way to sign up in late December for individual projects to be in the hot seat.
Yeah. Or they could just post a comment on that post, because you don't want it to be too complicated.
Yeah, and then I think like we put up the spot to accept the posts, and then 2 weeks or 3 weeks prior, we can start reaching out to people, and if they don't respond, then they lose their spot or they get bumped down.
Yeah, that's if anyone responds at all.
Right. So. Yeah.
So, all right. The other option right now is if we don't have anyone in the hot seat, just to hang out. We don't need to. I have another conversation in half an hour. I booked them up back to back because I knew I'd be somewhat cognitively available at 10. Might not be at noon. There's too much time in between.
Yeah.
We don't need to hang out and spend time for the next half an hour if we don't have anything to discuss.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if Ben wants to hang out, I wouldn't mind chatting about the tech stuff for 5 or 10 minutes just to.
Yeah.
I do what you guys. All right. How about I leave and you guys continue with that and stop the recording when you want, because it might be that it helps somebody else with their project as well.
Sure.
It's proprietary stuff. All right. Thanks, guys. I'll see you on Friday.
All right. Thanks, Jim. Bye. All right. So I was going through and sort of trying to figure out, is it worth doing the extra work to make this platform knowing that sort of then each portal becomes its own project, and that is sort of the terminology and sort of the structure and how I was thinking about splitting it up. Is the Conferati platform itself would be called just that. It's the platform where users would never use that directly. They would only be using it through portals. And then there would end up being a portal for WikiLection, a portal for Conferati. There's probably going to end up being a portal for like GameB projects. The idea being that the platform sort of shares the data between the portals. Not all the portals would no portal would have all the information. It would just sort of be a slice, right? So like WikiLection would be really only be looking at like politicians and lobbyists and people. And for organizations, it would be looking at like parties and maybe lobbying groups. And the Conferati will be looking at like organizations and people in the C-suite and on boards. So it would be sharing the data that way. It would be sharing the interface, and so just the way that the navigation is structured, everything in the top bar, like the icon and the label of the portal will change. The positioning of the module selector would be the same, and it would just be what modules are inside. Right, so WikiLection might have like people and elections and stuff like that as modules, and whereas of course Conferati wouldn't have elections. And then that shared interface is also sort of the interface used to build the pages itself, and those will have a lot in common. Where really there's going to be pages like to sort of a home page, a page to list records, and a page to show records. That's kind of the core of it, right? Where like the top level navigation for WikiLection, like it's going to end up being things like people, organizations, elections, that might end up, and legislation. And then you can go to each one of those, and then that would let you sort of drill into the underlying data. So if you go to legislation, you would first of all probably have to search by your area, because it's going to default to say, oh, if I'm in Canada, it's going to show me Canadian legislation. I can still, if I'm being nosy, I can still go look at the US. But the idea is that it would help you find one piece of legislation, and then when you go to view that record, you can see who voted on it, who submitted it, and you can start to drill into the information that way. And then finally, the goal is that they would have a shared login. So like if you're logged into one, it would be a bit like Google, right, where you got like your app selector, and then you can switch apps, and it keeps you logged in. It's the exact same account, and now you're just in Google Docs instead of Google Sheets. So that is sort of the basic idea behind what the platform would sort of be providing. And then each portal, it effectively would need to specify what objects or what tables it's looking at, along with any sort of built-in filters, like for people on WikiLection, they would mostly just be looking at politicians. So like unless this, a CEO has some sort of a background that involves politics, then they wouldn't show up on WikiLection at all. Similar to that is that sort of top level setup where each portal is split into modules. And then that's just, your top level options like WikiLection having people, organizations, elections, and so on. And then each of those modules would sort of be designed to allow for, okay, you're going to find this record, you're going to view it, and here's the things that you can drill into and how that layout will look. And then those would end up being accessed initially just through a subdomain on Conferati, right? So you might have like app.conferati.com is just the main app that's going to end up being super unwieldy, and then we'd start out with wikilection.conferati.com being WikiLection, with the end goal for that to end up being mapped to also just app.conferati.com. And then spinning up new portals would sort of be like that. And that part, it's not trying to be Salesforce. It's not trying to be like everything is super streamlined to set up. If it's, editing config files and trying to like enter in field names and XY coordinates on a canvas, whatever is needed to power that. But that basic idea of the platform really just being like that canvas to hold or to power these portals, and then the portal displays modules which can then sort of have unique controls to look at information, to find it, to modify it, etc. But then those modules could also be reused across any of the other portals. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think in general, if you know from the beginning that you're going to want to have a flexible UI that can display, different content and maybe even hide different parts out and filter and sort, then it's not that difficult. Now, I was also hoping that the core chunk of this technology could also be used on a completely different database of data, like, for no code, choosing no code software and stuff like that.
Right.
So that'd be a separate database than the Conferati one.
In the end, it might end up being in the same one, because there's going to be core things like organizations that will probably spread across every single app, or close to it. And so there might not be a lot of bleed over to start with, but eventually, if you end up with, entries in the organization table for things like Google and Microsoft and things like that, and they are involved in some of these, here's 10 apps, that one's by Microsoft and that one's by Google, and here, and then also you using these same like organizations and people and projects for the GameB projects, you can start to reuse sort of all of those lists anywhere that they're needed. And as they grow, yeah, I think to start with there wouldn't be overlap, but once you start to like track organizations and stuff like that, you would kind of want it in the same list. And
right, but yeah, some of the apps won't have organizations at all. So like if it's a whole bunch of homeschoolers that are trying to create virtual classrooms and they want to make sure the kids are diverse, then you'd want to, that'd just be a small database. So having a system where you could spin it up. So the added complexity, though, is, but in all the designs, I've always wanted it to be very flexible on the views. So if you have that, then yeah, as long as you configure those views, then you can have multiple sites looking at the same database, or you can create another site and have it have its own database. So it should be flexible enough to do that. So I would leave that in the requirements, and then just whenever you have your developers looking at it, whether it's me or Radek, just we'll look at it and see if there's any really challenging bits to that.
Right.
But it would only be like 5 or 10% increase, I think, in the
cool.
in the development.
That's good. Yeah, and then I think it would be passing off some of the development work to me or to whoever ends up doing that like portal setup side. Yeah. Which is kind of what I want, right? It's where I can go in there, and as long as the platform is still doing its thing and up and online, then I can keep building out the individual portals. And then as I'm like, oh, I can't move forward on this portal until I have these features, that's kind of the immediate future that I see for Conferati, is where there's the team working on the platform to sort of, like the new pieces of Lego. Hey, we just came out, with a new wing for a spaceship. Great, now I can build that spaceship that I've been planning. Something similar to that, where as the new controls come out, as there's as new tables are added to the data set, you can start to figure out where that fits in. Like, the wiki election portal might, it would definitely show legislation. The Conferati main app might, like at the deepest levels, be adding that to the scoring, but you would have to dig in sort of very specific ways to ever actually see legislation in that side of things. But it would still be in the underlying data. And I expect that some apps might start out being completely isolated. They would still be in that overall pool of like, we could eventually connect those tables to something else if needed. But in the end, if it was just 3 tables that always lived on their own, the platform could still support that.
Yeah.
Cool. And then there was the other part where we were sort of talking about potentially using Ruby on Rails. And I had gone through and sort of tried to figure out which of the features that Ruby on Rails provides would I sort of be wanting to use. And I used that same article that I had sent before. And honestly, almost everything I read through, like some weren't going to be needed for the first 6 months or a year, but like down the road, I can see like, yeah, I would totally want that, right? Like things like payments, where I definitely don't need that on day one, but like within, 6 months or a year, there's probably going to be various reasons to do payments. And then the ability to just have, oh, okay, great, they have a gem that you can plug in, and you're going to need merchant accounts and stuff like that. But from everything I've read about Ruby on Rails, that's sort of the selling point, is that it might not be exactly what you want, but for prototype purposes, and you can always tweak it too. It being that like you get started there, it can really streamline that initial development, and then after that, I think it's just regular Ruby development, like to do stuff that's not in a gem.
I don't
like I went through that page.
Yeah, I don't think Ruby development would be any faster than.
Right. Yeah. Like just developing new things. I don't expect to be faster. It's just the gems that speed things up.
No,
as far
but
as
I'm
I
saying
know.
a gem on Ruby, I don't think is any faster than using the pre-built tools from whatever provider you use to do payments.
So they've all got those levels of libraries.
Yeah, if you're talking about it being a back end and then you have a front end, if you're going with a payment provider, you use the payment provider as the back end.
Well, no, but this is like, I assume it then allows like, it provides that gateway for your software to talk to the gateways, right? And because there's going to end up needing to be something on your own back end to talk to.
Right. But you don't need that anymore. That's like a one line thing. I mean, you have your backend API, on thing, and it just needs kind of a pass through to get to theirs to validate who you are. But after that, it's all handled from the client directly to their backend.
Right.
That's kind of old tech.
Yeah. I'm really weirded out by the conversation around Ruby on Rails then, because it seems like everyone that works on it talks about it as though that's the differentiator.
3 years ago it was, but that's old news.
But this article is from 2020.
Well, people still write
and they're talking
new articles based on old information. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but this is from like a Ruby on Rails dev house. Like that's what they do. Is they? I was looking at their site and sort of what they offer, and their core technologies are Ruby on Rails and React. Like that's the things that they have on their site as like.
Right. Well, Ruby's on Rails is what they know, so that's why that's what their articles would say. You're looking at a biased source.
Right, but I guess right.
And if you want to send me the articles, then I can see if there's anything in there.
It's still just that, yeah. I can send you that one. It's really just sort of talking about the gems. But if it's like, if all of the, or at least, the majority of the different dev environments already have that, and it's, just like, what other technologies, because I know that React is a front end, so what other back ends would have this kind of a library that I can go see what sort of pages they have and what sort of libraries
I'm just saying people are talking payments, about. For payments, you directly hit the back end of the payment provider. You don't, if you're doing a pass through, it's a simple pass through. That gem can do a lot of stuff. I mean, maybe it's hooking it up to your database and stuff. I don't know. I mean, I would have to look at it, but I haven't handled payments, but a lot of people, payments have been done without Ruby on Rails for a long time. It doesn't seem like
it's just usually a crap ton of work. Like I've worked on projects
it's not a lot of
that
I just don't think it's a lot of work. I mean, I don't think you choose a whole.
So which?
I mean, but everything else you do would be harder on Ruby on Rails than, because you don't, if we're using what Radix already using, you don't write a backend. You don't
Right.
have it's the pre-built backend. When you create the database, it is a backend. You don't. Yeah.
And then what, like, is then the front end just connecting and working directly on the database? Like,
Well, not
what's actually doing the work on the
it's
database?
through the automatedly built API. I mean, it's similar to Ruby on Rails that, instead of, so in Ruby on Rails, you have to like write the database, then you have to write the Ruby code, which is very, very fast because it's a prototype, because it's a thing. But on the new ones, you write the database and it creates that API piece for you. And then you use GraphQL, so your front end can decide what information it wants. Now, so there may be, it may be that yeah, it really depends on how complicated your payment needs are. Like if you only have like one price for everyone, then you, in your database, you just need to know paid or not, are they recurring and stuff like that. So that's really short. If it's like, you have a whole bunch, if you have different SKUs for thousands of different products and you need to integrate that with the database of products, but still you're going to have a lot of time with integration because the gem is not going to be built for that specific, how you're storing that data.
Right. Yeah. It would need to work with the specifics of however the billing system is designed within Conferati. So I think in my notes from the last time that we talked about this, go ahead.
I mean, the problem is you would need to find some Ruby on Rails developers.
Right. Yeah, that part. I guess I'm trying to come to terms with the information that I've read and sort of why Ruby even still exists at all. Like why anybody would ever choose to use it, and like why they're even coming out with new gems.
The same reason C# still works, because people are still pushing forward. I mean, it's not like it's a bad thing. It's just, I
think part of it too is also wondering why WikiElection is stalled. And I feel like part of it is if there was sort of more things that could just get plugged in, the goal is to be able, to add any of these new features very easily. Where it's just like, oh, we want to do this. Great, that's 10 hours instead of 200 hours.
The things he's trying to build wouldn't exist in a gem.
Right.
So I don't think that's related to the gems.
Okay.
And there's no gem for, abstracting out relationships.
Right, like the scoring and all that stuff.
I mean, you can go with Ruby on Rails, but I can't even manage a Ruby on Rails team. I mean, I could from a completely project management standpoint, but I wouldn't know. I wouldn't want to spend the time looking at Ruby on Rails code because I'm not going to switch tech.
Right.
So, I mean, but I don't. Yeah, I just.
Okay.
I don't think it's so fast that that it's worth switching, me personally, to switch tech.
Right. Okay. So then because in my notes from the last time we talked about this, I had sort of like notes to compare Ruby on Rails to Firebase. Is Firebase sort of like the backend in this case, and it's also, so it's the database and it's the automated API that you were talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, like, I don't know if Firebase like has an equivalent plugin for payments. Pretty sure they don't. But Firebase has like the built-in membership and stuff.
Okay. Yeah, when I went to look at that article, one second, let me move this window over so I can sort of see.
Although I'm using MongoDB instead of Firebase, but yeah.
Yeah, because when I went and looked at, where's that spot? Yeah, when I was looking at that page, actually here, I'll put this in the chat just so you can sort of see the same thing I was. The same article as last time. Like when I went through and I was trying to figure out which of these I would use, it more came down to like their categories, where certain categories I'm like, I don't have skin in that game. I mean, if it was useful, sure, like stuff for debugging and stuff like that. What, I'm not going to enforce any of that on the developers because I don't really have an opinion there. But like pretty much everything in the active record sections, in testing, authentication, their part on API sounded interesting, but I mean, if that's being automated, that might not be that's not reinventing the wheel. The part on security,
But they all
payments.
They all have security authentication and authorization. So MongoDB, Firebase, Ruby on Rails.
Right. Oh, okay. So that one's gone.
So they all have that. The
Sounds
payment thing, if you go to Firebase, they don't say anything, but they have it's a one-page thing on here's how you hook up Stripe.
Okay.
But so they could have, it could be more like they may already have. But see, the thing is, if you're talking about a React front end, they don't have any screens. But I mean, maybe they have back end APIs to sync up the Stripe, like cancellations, the Stripe chargebacks, and sync it up to a database in whatever database backend Ruby you have your Ruby on Rails hooked up to.
Right.
So maybe they have some more advanced features like that, but just charging, just like charging a credit card, I could do that without a backend at all. Just use
right.
PayPal.
Yeah, and I'd want the proper billing backend, right, to handle chargebacks and all that stuff to whatever extent.
Well, for most businesses, you just do those through the Stripe website, right? How do you need that synced up to your thing so that if someone does a chargeback, they lose access to the database?
Well, the charges would end up being for it, but it's also for just like any app on the platform to use, right? It could end up being, if there was a store at some point, it could use it. I imagine one of the first uses is going to be like a very light version of Patreon, where it's not just paying for that. It's right, like it's probably step one is billing for itself, and then step two is billing for projects.
Yeah, I wouldn't assume that the Ruby on Rails gem would handle that scenario.
Yeah, the two gems it talked about, one of them was built by, it looks like Shopify, and I mean, with how they wrote it, I wouldn't be at all surprised if that was available in a bunch of technologies, because it sounds like payments. Yeah, there we go.
A multi-tenant subscription kind of billing system. I mean, yeah, if they have that, that wouldn't be something that Firebase has built in.
Right. Yeah, I think in this case, it's mostly just like the API integration with the popular gateways is basically how they're doing it. But payments is also only one of the things, right? And then the other things on that page was that there was stuff to do with uploading files, which it sounded like they had some interesting tools to do with, like, processing images, and I guess the thing for external storage, that's probably a common one too. But it has things, for if you're going to be storing some files in the Amazon Elastic Cloud or Google Cloud Storage, etc. They have gems for that. They had stuff for scheduled and recurring jobs, which sounded interesting, because I think that was a challenge that Radek was having with the scoring, was like the when to calculate it and when to actually trigger it and that sort of thing. And so they had some apps for the scheduling of jobs and recurring jobs, stuff for search.
No, that's all. I think that's as built in on like the scheduling jobs. That's a pretty standard Firebase thing. Radek may have had trouble because he'd never done it before, but you just write a function and say when you want the schedule to run.
Okay, yeah. So if it's just like, if it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, like if the majority of these gems, if it's if Firebase is missing 2 of them, I don't care. Like it doesn't have to have every single thing, because it probably just has a different library where it's going to end up having something that Rails doesn't have. So as long as it has that same, the idea of it being easier because you can just sort of.
I mean, it'd be easiest to double check if you had a list of the, you talked about putting together a list and then just glance at it and say, yeah, Firebase has that. Firebase doesn't.
Yeah, like that page that I sent, basically everything under those headings, because I started to go through and list
under
each
those
one.
Headings? Which headings?
Active record, testing, authentication, security, payments, uploading files, scheduling and recurring jobs, search, and admin panel. Those sections sort of on that page I sent. I was going through like actually typing out each gem, and then like for the first 3, I typed out all of the gems under those headers. I'm like, oh, I just want all of it. And a big part of it too is I don't know what gems are out there, and so if I were to end up using Ruby, part of it would hopefully be, finding a Ruby developer who's used stuff in previous projects and they may have some stuff to suggest as well, which ends up being the same thing for Firebase, right? If you work with a Firebase developer, they're going to have things that they've used.
I mean, Ruby's been around longer, so its community is probably bigger than Firebase or MongoDB. So it's
I did get the
are going to be a little bit more
vibe that the overall development community kind of looks at Ruby like you are, like where it's like, yeah, it's there, but why? There was like, it seemed like a lot of developers were shying away from it and being like, yeah, it's okay, but it's slow and it's this and it's that, and there wasn't a lot of it. It was more just the articles that were written, and even the newer ones were like, it's meant for prototyping, it's meant for really quick stuff like that. I guess that's not to say it's the only one that's good for that. So as long as Firebase, now I guess it sounds like Firebase, so it's the database and the automatic API.
And hosting and scheduling and authorization.
Okay, and then you can sort of tack on any extra backend stuff that you need as well.
Yeah, so it has. They use serverless functions, so you can write some code, and that code will be available to be run and called from the front end at any time.
Right. How does being serverless work with a database?
Serverless is just a place. So, like, normally you have an application server, and then you have a database server. It's the application server, except it runs on any one of 1,000 computers, and it runs separately. Is that running on the client side, and then it's just all the clients are doing direct connections to the API? When they say serverless, it doesn't mean there isn't a server. It means it's someone else's server. You're using a cloud server.
Right. Okay.
So your code is running on one of 20 machines, but it's running on a server.
I see, like in any, like on EWS or Netlify or any of those types of things. Okay.
Yeah. Now, in this case, if you're using Firebase, it will be run at Google because Firebase is a Google product.
Okay.
And that's just the product that they were one of the first to kind of come out with that. Now there's an Azure version. AWS really doesn't have a good one. And I'm switching over to MongoDB, but it follows a lot closer to the philosophy than Ruby on Rails to Firebase. MongoDB is closer to Firebase,
right?
Because it's more serverless functions and stuff.
Okay, cool. So I guess because I started to work on the listing out all of the features of just Confrati itself, like regardless if we're going Ruby or Firebase or whatever, and that got like big fast. So at first I'm like, okay, let's just take a step back and try to figure out like which of the, because a part of it is,
well, your requirements shouldn't have any technology
right
in them, right? So.
Yeah, exactly. But I think a part of it is if there's something like, okay, I want these features. Okay, well, if we're going with Rails, then the main idea is to use existing gems. And so a part of it is you're restricted based on what gems there are. And you can do custom development, but if you go heavy down that road, then what was the point in using Rails in the first place?
Yeah. I mean, I mean, Rails could do anything Firebase can, because they're both general purpose languages.
Right. Yeah. It just sounds like the custom development might be a bit more arduous in Rails. Is that?
Well, no, I mean it would be for me because I don't know it. But
Right.
if you have a skilled Rails dev and a skilled, it might be a little bit because Rails doesn't include the database. Well, it kind of does because I think you could write that. I can't remember now which way Rails goes. I guess it may actually, when you write the Ruby code, it may generate the database.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I would imagine there's probably a ton of gems to help handle that, and so you can pick like what kind of database you're going to use. Here's a library of gems to.
It's there, so their tech. That's the active record tech that they're listing out there, and I just don't remember whether active record is which way it goes right now.
I see. Okay.
I wrote a little bit of it. Some of the stuff you write the code and it builds the database, so you don't have to worry about the database. And some of it you write the database and it builds some code.
Right.
Either way, it's a way where you only have to write half of it.
Okay. Cool. All right. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like then I don't need to go Rails if there's already these collections out there. I might go and shop around and see if I can find a similar article for Firebase just to see what sort of things there are for that. I wasn't so much attached to particular gems, more to just the idea of, hey, here's this collection of features that we can build out relatively easily to, a from scratch project. But if Firebase can do that too, then that's all I actually care about.
I mean, it's really hard to compare.
Right. I guess I kind of like that Firebase is newer because that means that the information you find out there is more likely to be current. Because that was definitely a problem as I was going through articles. I'm like, oh, this is neat. Oh, that's 4 years old. Okay, no, I don't care about that article.
Well, I mean, they've made some significant changes to Firebase, so you get some of that. But yeah, and I don't know. I mean, in the end, I think whenever I don't think anyone's shown that any particular tech stack is significantly faster to develop in, like a full stack.
Right.
So it really comes down to what your devs know. It's usually the deciding factor, unless you're building something really simple, and then you should go with Squarespace, right? Because if you don't have any custom functionality, then you don't even need a developer. But if you need a developer, then it's probably more driven by their stack.
Right. Okay.
And I don't think any of the stacks are significantly faster.
Okay. And then like the Firebase, React, whatever stack that is, that's a fairly popular one that like there will be a decent number of developers that can work in that. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's not so React being the front end, there'll be a lot of devs doing that. That is the most popular front end. I think Firebase is the back end will narrow down the people, but most anyone can learn it. It's not It's not a whole.
And it's a big enough one that they wouldn't have and it sort of seems to be gaining popularity from what I can tell. So it's not.
And actually it uses a lot of serverless functions, and that same technology, if you know it. It basically applies to Azure, Microsoft Azure as well, and MongoDB. So they all use that sort of tech. It's less specific. The only times you get into really specific stuff is the identity and authorization. But actually, that's mostly plug and play. So
cool.
I think you'd either be able to find people or they would be able to adapt pretty quickly.
Right, and it's a popular technology, so they wouldn't be wasting their time by learning it, which is good.
Right. Yeah.
Cool. Oh, okay. Nice. Yeah, I'll take a look around, but that definitely sounds better from what I was reading because they kept mentioning prototypes, but then they also sort of the general vibe I got is that not a lot of developers take Rails terribly seriously.
Well, yeah. Yeah, I haven't heard about it a lot except from you in the last year or two, but
I did some reading. It sounded like they were coming out with Ruby 3.0.
I'm
and like
probably
that.
just in the wrong group of people.
Yeah, I mean, that's a part of what I was sort of wondering is like, is it good? But like, you have to be a Ruby developer and know the gems and know this, and like, oh yeah, I've been working on it. Here's the gems you use to create this sweet stack. But then it's also possible that it's like, yeah, it's a sweet stack. You're like, yeah, I could have created that in Firebase, and now you're using old tech, and you're limited in the developers and so on. So
I mean, the system that has the most plugins is WordPress. So if you want the quickest prototype, WordPress is it. All right, I gotta let you go.
all right, cool. Thank you for your time, Bentley.
Sure. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.